The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a sharp contrast to the sterile office spaces Alex had grown accustomed to. He stood at the cabin's threshold, gripping the handle of his bag, hesitant to step inside. It had been years since he'd seen David, and the weight of their last conversation hung between them like a suspended note, unfinished but resonant. "Alex," a voice called from inside, warm and inviting. David appeared in the doorway, his frame broader, his smile just as disarming as Alex remembered. "You made it." Alex nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yeah, couldn't miss it." They embraced, a quick, friendly hug, but even that brief contact sent a shiver up Alex's spine. David smelled faintly of cedar and aftershave, a combination that lingered as they pulled apart. The cabin was smaller than Alex recalled, or perhaps his memories had been exaggerated by the passing years. The living room, with its worn leather couch and stone fireplace, felt intimate, almost too intimate. David led him to the kitchen where a bottle of wine stood uncorked on the counter. "Still prefer red?" David asked, pouring them both a glass. Alex smiled faintly. "You remembered." David handed him a glass, their fingers brushing briefly. "Some things you don't forget." They clinked glasses, the sound punctuating the thick silence between them. Alex sipped the wine, his gaze drifting to the window where the fading sunlight painted the room in golden hues. Memories of summers spent here flooded back, of laughter, late-night talks, and the unspoken tension that had always simmered beneath their friendship. "So," David began, leaning against the counter, "what's been keeping you busy?" Alex hesitated, unsure how to condense years of life into a few sentences. He chose the safe route. "Work. A lot of work. You?" David shrugged. "Same. Different city, different job, same old me." But he wasn't the same. Alex could see it in the way David carried himself now, with a quiet confidence that was both magnetic and intimidating. The years had been kind to him, and Alex felt the familiar pang of yearning he'd tried so hard to bury. As the evening wore on, the wine flowed freely, loosening their words. They moved to the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch. The fire crackled softly in the background, casting flickering shadows across David's face. "You've changed," David said suddenly, his tone softer now. Alex looked up, startled. "How so?" "You're quieter. More thoughtful, maybe?" Alex laughed nervously. "Or just tired. Adulting isn't as glamorous as they made it seem." David smiled, but there was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. "I don't know. I think it suits you." The compliment hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. Alex felt his pulse quicken, the room suddenly too warm despite the cooling night air. He looked down at his glass, swirling the remaining wine as if it held the answer to a question he couldn't bring himself to ask. David shifted closer, just slightly, but enough for Alex to feel the warmth radiating from him. "I missed this," David said quietly. "What?" Alex's voice was barely audible. "Us. You. Being able to just talk." Alex looked up, meeting David's gaze. The vulnerability there was disarming, and for a moment, he forgot to breathe. He wanted to say something, to bridge the gap between them, but the words wouldn't come. David reached out, his hand brushing against Alex's knee. A small, almost imperceptible gesture, but one that sent a jolt through Alex's entire body. He froze, unsure of what to do, but David didn't pull away. Instead, he let his hand linger, his touch warm and steady. "Alex," David began, his voice low, "there's something I need to say." The tension in the room was palpable, the silence almost deafening as Alex waited, his heart pounding in his chest. David hesitated, his fingers still resting lightly on Alex's knee. The warmth of his touch seeped through the fabric of Alex's jeans, grounding him even as his mind raced. The fire crackled in the silence, each pop and hiss magnifying the weight of the moment. Alex wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but the words were caught in his throat. "I've thought about this," David said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "About us." Alex's breath hitched. His heart felt like it might burst from his chest, the weight of David's words sending a jolt of adrenaline through him. "What do you mean?" he managed, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. David's eyes searched Alex's face, his expression soft but intense. "I don't know if I can explain it, but I felt it for a long time. This pull, I guess. Like there's something between us I've been too scared to name." Alex's stomach flipped, his mind spinning. He had spent years convincing himself that his feelings for David were one-sided, a foolish crush he'd buried under layers of friendship and self-doubt. But now, hearing David say those words, it felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. "You don't have to say anything," David continued, his hand moving slightly, his thumb brushing against Alex's leg in a gesture so small it could have been accidental, but wasn't. I needed you to know." Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry. The room seemed to close in around them, the firelight casting flickering shadows that danced across David's face. He looked vulnerable in a way Alex had never seen before, and it made his chest ache. "I don't know what to say," Alex admitted, his voice trembling. David, this is a lot." "I know," David said quickly, pulling his hand back as if realizing he'd crossed a line. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "No," Alex said more forcefully than he intended. He reached out, his hand catching David's before it could retreat completely. "You didn't. I'm just processing." David's eyes flicked to their joined hands, his expression softening. "Take your time," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." The sincerity in his voice made Alex's chest tighten. He nodded, his grip on David's hand firming slightly as he tried to collect his thoughts. The truth was, he'd thought about this moment countless times, but now that it was here, he didn't know how to handle it. "I felt it too," Alex admitted finally, his voice so quiet he wasn't sure David would hear him. "For a long time, but I didn't think this was something you wanted." David's breath caught, his eyes widening slightly. "You felt it too?" Alex nodded, his cheeks flushing. "Yeah, but I didn't want to ruin what we had. I thought it was just me." David let out a shaky laugh, his grip on Alex's hand tightening. "It was never just you." The weight of his words settled over them, heavy and electric. Alex's mind raced, but his body moved on instinct, leaning closer until their faces were only inches apart. He could feel David's breath against his skin, warm and unsteady, and the tension between them was almost unbearable. "Alex," David murmured, his voice trembling, "if this is too much, just say the word and I'll back off." But Alex didn't want him to back off. He didn't want to spend another moment pretending this wasn't exactly what he wanted, what he'd always wanted. He closed the remaining distance between them, his lips brushing against David's in a tentative kiss. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the firelight and the warmth of David's touch anchoring Alex as everything else faded away. David responded immediately, his free hand moving to cup Alex's cheek as the kiss deepened. It was slow and deliberate, filled with years of unspoken feelings and suppressed longing. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their foreheads resting together as they tried to process what had just happened. David's hand slid from Alex's cheek to his jaw, his thumb brushing against his skin in a gesture so tender it made Alex's chest ache. "Are you okay?" David asked, his voice soft but steady. Alex nodded, his heart pounding. "Yeah, I'm okay. Better than okay." David smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good, because I've wanted to do that for longer than I care to admit." Alex let out a shaky laugh, his hands still resting on David's shoulders. "Me too." The tension between them shifted. no longer heavy with uncertainty but instead charged with possibility. Alex felt like he was standing on the edge of something monumental, and for the first time, he wasn't afraid to take the leap. "What now?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. David leaned back slightly, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Now, we figure this out. Together." Alex nodded, a small smile breaking through his uncertainty. "Yeah, together." The rest of the night passed in a blur of quiet conversation and stolen glances. They moved to the couch, sitting close enough that their legs brushed, their hands occasionally finding each other's as they talked. The fire burned low, casting a warm glow that mirrored the quiet intimacy between them. By the time they finally retreated to their separate rooms, the air between them was charged with something unspoken but undeniable. Alex lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling as he replayed the events of the night in his mind. His chest felt light, his thoughts racing with the possibilities of what this could mean for them. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt like it might actually be something worth looking forward to. The next morning, the cabin was bathed in soft light, the pale winter sun filtering through the large windows and casting long shadows across the wooden floors. Alex woke slowly, his mind still hazy from the previous night. For a moment he wondered if it had all been a dream, the warmth of David's hand on his knee, the firelight reflecting in his eyes, the kiss that had shifted their entire dynamic. But when he sat up and caught the faint sound of movement from the kitchen, he knew it was real. He found David standing by the stove, the smell of coffee and sizzling bacon filling the air. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, his hair slightly mussed, and he looked so effortlessly comfortable that Alex couldn't help but smile. "Morning," David said, glancing over his shoulder and grinning when he saw Alex. "Sleep okay?" "Yeah," Alex replied, his voice still rough with sleep. "You?" David nodded, turning back to the stove. "Surprisingly well." Alex moved to the counter, leaning against it as he watched David cook. It felt natural, easy, as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. But beneath the surface there was a quiet tension, a lingering awareness of what had changed between them. David handed him a mug of coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a familiar jolt through Alex's chest. He looked down at the steaming mug, his thoughts racing as he tried to find the right words. "About last night," Alex began, his voice hesitant. David set the spatula down and turned to face him, his expression soft but serious. "You don't have to say anything if you're not ready." "No, I want to," Alex said quickly, his cheeks flushing. I don't know where to start." David leaned against the counter, crossing his arms as he studied Alex. "How about this? Are you okay with what happened?" Alex met his gaze, the sincerity in David's eyes making his chest tighten. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady. "I'm okay with it. More than okay." David's shoulders relaxed slightly, and a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Good, me too." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them softening but not disappearing entirely. Alex took a sip of his coffee, the warmth spreading through him as he tried to find the words to explain everything he was feeling. "I've spent so long convincing myself that what I felt for you wasn't real," Alex admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "That it was just in my head." David stepped closer, his expression softening. "It wasn't just in your head, Alex. Not for me, anyway." Alex looked up, his breath catching at the intensity in David's gaze. "Then why didn't you say anything?" David hesitated, his hand running through his hair. "Because I was scared. I didn't want to ruin what we had, and I didn't know if you felt the same." "I did," Alex said, his voice trembling. "I do." David's eyes softened and he reached out, his hand brushing against Alex's arm. "Then let's stop running from it." The simplicity of his words made Alex's chest ache, and he found himself nodding before he could second-guess himself. Okay. David smiled, the warmth in his expression chasing away the last of Alex's doubts. Okay. They ate breakfast together, the conversation light but tinged with a new closeness that neither of them tried to hide. David told stories about his work and the places he'd traveled, and Alex found himself laughing more than he had in weeks. It felt easy, natural, and Alex couldn't help but wonder why they'd waited so long to get here. After breakfast, they decided to take a walk along the edge of the lake. The snow crunched softly beneath their boots, and their breath puffed in the cold air as they talked. The lake was frozen over, the surface shimmering in the sunlight, and the trees stood bare against the pale blue sky. David walked close enough that their shoulders brushed occasionally, and every small touch sent a spark through Alex's chest. He wanted to reach out, to take David's hand, but he hesitated, unsure of how to bridge the gap between them. "Penny, for your thoughts?" David asked, glancing at him. Alex smiled faintly, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Just thinking about how different this feels." "Different how?" David asked, his tone curious. Alex hesitated, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Like, I'm not holding my breath anymore. Like I'm finally letting myself feel everything I've been pushing down for years." David stopped walking, turning to face Alex. His expression was serious, but there was a softness in his eyes that made Alex's chest tighten. "You don't have to hold your breath around me, Alex. Not anymore." Alex felt his throat tighten, the weight of David's words settling over him. He nodded, his voice barely audible as he said, "I'm trying." David smiled, stepping closer until they were only inches apart. "You don't have to try so hard. Just be here. With me." Alex looked up, his breath catching at the closeness between them. The world around them seemed to fade away, the cold forgotten as David reached out, his hand brushing against Alex's cheek. The touch was soft, tentative, but it sent a shiver through Alex's entire body. "Can I kiss you?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alex nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "Yeah." David leaned in, his lips brushing against Alex's in a kiss that was slow and deliberate. Alex closed his eyes, his hands moving to David's shoulders as he gave himself over to the moment. The kiss deepened, the warmth of David's touch chasing away the lingering chill of the winter air. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless, their foreheads resting together as they tried to process what had just happened. Alex felt a smile tug at his lips, and he opened his eyes to find David watching him with an expression that made his chest ache. "I think I could get used to this," David said, his voice light but filled with emotion. "Me too," Alex replied, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. They stood there for a while, the frozen lake stretching out behind them, the winter air crisp and quiet. And for the first time in years, Alex felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The walk back to the cabin was quieter, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was filled with a sense of understanding, as though the kiss by the lake had rewritten something fundamental between them. Alex stayed close to David, their shoulders brushing occasionally, each touch sparking a new warmth inside him that had nothing to do with the layers of clothing protecting them from the cold. Back at the cabin, David stoked the fire, coaxing the flames to life as Alex slipped off his boots and set them by the door. The glow from the fireplace filled the room, chasing away the last chill of the winter air. Alex sat on the couch, his thoughts still spinning, and watched as David moved with an easy confidence, his presence filling the space in a way that felt natural. David caught Alex watching him and smiled, his gaze soft. "Do you want anything? Tea? Another coffee?" Alex shook his head, his voice quiet but steady. "No, I'm good." David crossed the room, sitting beside Alex on the couch. The cushions shifted beneath their weight, pulling them just a little closer. Alex felt his pulse quicken as David turned to face him, one leg bent on the couch, his arm draped along the backrest. "You're quiet," David said, his voice gentle. What's on your mind? Alex hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his sweater. Just trying to wrap my head around all of this. David reached out, his hand covering Alex's and stilling the nervous movement. All of this? Alex nodded, his throat tight. United States. Everything that's happened in the last 24 hours. It's a lot. David's grip on his hand tightened slightly, his thumb brushing against Alex's knuckles. It is, but it's good, right? Alex looked up, meeting David's gaze. The vulnerability there made his chest ache. Yeah, it's good, really good. David's smile was small but genuine, and he shifted closer, his hand still holding Alex's. I know this is new, and I don't want to rush you, but I need you to know how much you mean to me. The weight of David's words settled over Alex, and he felt a lump rise in his throat. He wanted to say something, to express everything he was feeling, but the emotions were too big, too tangled. Instead, he leaned in, closing the small distance between them and pressing his lips to David's. The kiss was slower this time, more deliberate. Alex felt David's hand move to his jaw, his touch steady and grounding as their lips moved together. Alex's hands slid to David's shoulders, gripping the fabric of his sweater as he let himself get lost in the moment. David shifted, deepening the kiss, and Alex felt himself being pulled closer. The warmth of the fire, the faint scent of cedarwood, the feel of David's hands on him. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. Alex's heart raced as he felt David's fingers slide down his arm, anchoring him in a way that felt both thrilling and safe. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. David rested his forehead against Alex's, his eyes closed as he caught his breath. "Tell me this isn't a dream," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Alex let out a shaky laugh, his fingers brushing against David's cheek. "It's not a dream." I promise. David opened his eyes, his gaze steady and filled with emotion. "Good, because I don't think I've ever felt this right about anything." Alex's chest tightened and he nodded, his own voice trembling as he said, "Me neither." They stayed like that for a long time, their foreheads touching, their breaths mingling in the quiet. The fire crackled softly in the background, casting flickering shadows across the room. Alex felt a sense of peace settle over him, a feeling he hadn't realized he'd been missing until now. David pulled back slightly, his hand still resting on Alex's cheek. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," Alex said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "Why did it take us so long to get here?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of years of unspoken feelings and missed opportunities. Alex hesitated, his mind racing as he tried to find the right words. "I think I was scared," he admitted finally. "Scared of what it might mean, scared of losing you if it didn't work out." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I was scared too, but I think we were always going to end up here, one way or another." Alex felt a smile tug at his lips and he leaned into David's touch. "Yeah, I think you're right." David smiled back, his thumb brushing against Alex's cheek. "So, what now?" Alex hesitated, his gaze dropping to their joined hands. "I don't know, but I want to figure it out. With you." David's smile widened and he leaned in to press a soft kiss to Alex's forehead. "We'll take it one step at a time. Together." "Together," Alex echoed, the word feeling both terrifying and exhilarating. The rest of the day passed in a blur of quiet moments and soft laughter. They cooked dinner together, their movements easy and natural as they navigated the small kitchen. David kept finding excuses to touch Alex, a hand on his back as he reached for a pan, a brush of fingers as he handed over a cutting board, and each touch sent a spark through Alex's chest. Later, they sat by the fire, a blanket draped over their legs as they talked about everything and nothing. The tension between them had shifted, no longer heavy with uncertainty but instead filled with a quiet anticipation. Alex felt like he was seeing David in a new light, and it made his chest ache in the best way. As the night wore on, Alex found himself leaning against David, his head resting on his shoulder. David's arm wrapped around him, pulling him closer, and Alex felt a sense of warmth and safety that he hadn't realized he'd been missing. "Thank you," Alex said softly, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "For what?" David asked, his voice warm and steady. "For everything. For being patient. For making me feel like this is okay." David pressed a soft kiss to the top of Alex's head, his hand brushing against his arm. "It's more than okay, Alex. It's perfect." Alex closed his eyes, letting himself relax into David's embrace. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be.